Hi, Tim Clapham here for FX PhD, and this is the first class of C4D213, and this week we're going to take a look at using the MoSpline object, which is a bit like a spline on steroids. And we're going to start off with the basics and just have a look at the parameters, because there's an awful lot you can do with it, and then we're going to have a look at a few more practical examples of how you might use that in your everyday projects. If we come to the MoGraph menu, come down, you can add in the MoSpline. And you can see we get this line in our editor viewport. And it's also got this sort of blue color on it. Now that's so that we can use it to control thickness when we're generating geometry. So with the MoSpline selected, switch to the Object tab, and you can see currently mode is set to simple. And what that means is that the MoSpline is just going to generate a simple spline based on how we adjust these parameters. Let me just pull this across. Now you might not be able to see all of these parameters here because you can fold this up and down, and this just allows you to create curves, etc. as you move your spline beyond the end of its limits. So at the moment it says simple grow complete spline. We can grow separate segments. If we have more than one segment on our spline, we can adjust the start and the end of our spline, and we can also adjust the offset. And you can take these values above 100 and below 0. Underneath this we have a field for a destination spline and for some spline rails, and you can actually create an empty spline object. You can't use parametric splines, but if you drop that in here and they're in the same hierarchy, you can use MoSpline to pass its information effectively onto a real spline, so that could be handy in some situations. Display mode is set to full shape. We can also choose line. You can see now it's just a black line, or we can choose two lines. So if we just come in a little bit closer, you can see that we have the black line for the actual spline, and then a white line which shows the width. Let's come back to full shape and switch to the simple tab, and here we have a width parameter, and I folded that down so we can see a spline there, but if we just adjust that, you can see the width of our MoSpline adjusts. And now if I come back to the Object tab and set this to dual lines, you can see how that display is shown there, and that just maybe will speed things up or remove clutter from the viewport perhaps. Let's leave it on full shape for now, and let's set the width just to be maybe 15 or something. At the top here you can see we can adjust the length of our spline and the number of steps. Now if we come down to the curve, bend and twist parameters, we can actually create like a circle if we adjust the curve. If we maybe adjust the curve, let's say 1440, and let's add some twist, and you can see that what we're doing now is we're creating a kind of helix shape, like so. So we can use these parameters to animate from a straight line to a circle into a helix, for instance. Let's reset the curve and twist back to 0, and let's set the length just to be, say, 250. So there's our MoSpline. We've also got a parameter here for the number of segments, so this gives you another whole level of control. If we set this to 10, you can't actually see any difference, but if we suddenly increase the angle, now you can see I've got my 10 segments. So it's a bit like a cloner in a way, but for creating splines. And now we've got a multi-segment spline. We can come back here, grow mode, and we can change that to separate segments. And if we choose offset, we can get these funky effects. You can see the difference as I offset this now. It's offsetting all as one spline, but if we set this to separate segments, we can get these groovy effects. And of course we can kind of go over 100, and we can come back and go through, and you can imagine that that could be really great for creating some nice graphical elements. Switching back to the simple tab, I'm going to set the segments back to 1. Let's just set the angle here to 0. Probably the best way to understand these parameters is just to have a play with them all. But what I want to do is I'm just going to set this width to be 50, with the mow spline selected, hold down Alt and let's add in a sweep. Now you still need an input spline as well, so let's just hold Shift and add in a circle spline. So now really what we're doing can be done with any normal setup. You can see the geometry there. If we select our sweep and set the 2-rail parameter to be disabled, now it's only going to take the input from our mow spline. You still need this spline here, and it's kind of like a dummy spline, but now if we adjust the width of our mow spline, you can see it's actually adjusting the width of the geometry. So you're basically using the mow spline to define this circle's size. But of course, because we've got this geometry here, we can still add in our curves, you know, and our bends, etc. And underneath the width we have a spline, and we can use this to adjust the actual width. So at the top here, at the highest point, it's at the maximum, whatever we set here, and at this point here it's at 0. And we can click on here and create more points, etc. Or we can actually right click and choose any of our spline presets. We can even type formulas into the formula field down here. So if you're into maths, then you can kind of create some animated splines, etc. using formulas. Let's just grab this and delete this. I'm going to add in a fresh mow spline. I'm also going to add in a circle spline, and let's set this circle spline to be, say, 600. Let's press C to make this editable, and I'm going to uncheck close spline and just delete this bottom point. So we've basically got a big arc here. Let's select the mow spline again, switch to the object tab, and instead of simple mode, let's set this to be spline. So it's basically taking a spline as an input. And you notice that as I change these, this tab changes. It says simple, now it says spline, and we've also got turtle in there, and we'll have a brief look at turtle as well later. So let's set spline, switch to the spline tab, grab our circle spline, or it's a half a circle, and drop that into the source, and you can see now the mow spline follows that spline, which is really handy because we get all the animation properties, etc. for our mow spline, but we're working with a regular spline. So this could be a logo or anything from your clients or something that you've drawn. And of course we can adjust the width here as well, and again we have a spline that we can use to control that width along the length of the spline. The generation mode is interesting, and at the moment it's set to vertex, and these are very similar to mow graph controls when you're working with a cloner. And vertex means that it's basically going to use the existing vertices on the spline, so on our circle spline, and it's going to create an identical spline. If we choose count, even, or step, it will use alternative generation modes. So count will be the number of vertices that we specify, even will be an even gap between each vertex, and you specify the amount, and then step will be a specific gap or a distance between each vertex. Let's just leave it on vertex for now. So it's creating a spline exactly the same as the circle spline. Come back to our object tab, and here we can grow, etc. And we can also use offset, and you can see now as I offset this that we're getting these really cool twists appearing. And if we come down to the extend options, we can disable that so it doesn't extend, and we can adjust these curves, and we can get rid of the spiral, etc., depending on what we want to do. So that's pretty useful. And of course we can use negative values in here if we want to extend that any further. Now you might need to come into the spline and just increase the angle or decrease the angle here to stop this stair stepping. If we set that to 2, you can see that now it's looking a little bit smoother. Or maybe you want to set this to be uniform and increase the number of points, and there you go, and you can see that the effect that that has. Let's just set that back to adaptive. So that's pretty cool. If you wanted to, create a sweep and animate it along a path, for instance, you could just drop this into a sweep as we did before, Or another thing that maybe you'd like to do is to use it with align to spline. So if we just add in a cone, for instance, set that cone to be oriented plus Z, and let's maybe make the radius a bit smaller, and let's change the color so we can see it. Let's make this red or something like so. So there we go, you can see the cone. If we add to this cone an align to spline tag and drag the mo spline in, and let's set tangential to be on, and now if we come to our mo spline and animate the offset, you can see that we actually animate the object. And if we set the display mode to be line, or we set the end to be, say, 0.1, so we don't really see that mo spline. Now if we pull this, you can see how it works. So it's a kind of alternative way of using align to spline, and we can extend beyond the spline that we're attached to, and we can also have the option of having these curves, etc. So it's probably a good idea to like see the whole spline if you're going to start adjusting these curves. Maybe take that spiral out, and then as we adjust this offset, you can see what happens. So we can get some really nice, interesting results like that too. Okay, let's just select these objects and delete them. I'm going to add in, let's just come to front view, and let's draw a bezier spline. I'm going to just draw a kind of S shape, something like so. With the spline still selected, let's hold down Alt and add in a sweep, and then let's hold down Shift and add in a circle, and let's scale this circle down. And if we select the sweep and we come down, and let's just set the scale like so. I'm just going to make this white so you can see what's going on. So this is quite a common thing to create sweep NURBS in your scenes, and very often you'll be animating the sweep. So perhaps you'll be animating the growth. So maybe you want the sweep to grow like this. It's a pretty common thing that we do. Now, one of the issues with using a sweep, of course, is that it's actually cuts off. So as we animate the end growth, we start with a really fat cylinder and we end at our point. Now, in some situations, you may well want that result, but other times you may want this to remain like a point at this end and fat at this end as it grows, which perhaps would look a little bit more natural. Using mo spline, we can do that. Rather than animating the actual growth of the sweep NURBS itself, so we animate the growth of the spline. So if we take this spline that we've already got, and I'm going to hold down Alt and add a mo spline, just so that spline becomes a child. With the mo spline, let's, under the Object tab, choose Mode Spline, and then under the Spline tab, grab our source spline and drop it into the field like so. Now we can come down to the width parameter and we can adjust the width, and you can see that the mo spline width isn't changing radius, but the sweep itself has still got this scale spline that's adjusting the radius of the geometry as we travel along the length. So I'm actually just going to hide the mo spline so we can just see the generated geometry. But now if we select our mo spline and switch to the Object tab, and if we animate the end here, you can see that what happens is we keep this point all the way along. So that's what happens when you animate the mo spline, and this is what happens when you animate the sweep. And you can see it's quite a different result, and depending on how you're using this, depends on which solution works best for you. And of course we can take that maybe down, and then we can animate this offset, which has given us a little bit of a funky result there, and that's probably just to do with the interpolation of the spline that we're animating along. But it's a bit like using a spline wrap or something like so, but it's all built into the mo spline object. Let's just set that back to 100. So you can see again another handy feature of working with mo spline. Okay, so let's look at how we can use things like mo spline with forces, how we can use it in combination with other MoGraph elements. So we're going to create a little bit more of a complicated example now, but you know, still fairly simple and lots of potential. So I'm going to add in a MoSpline object. Let's also add in a landscape object so that we have some terrain. And we can make this fairly simple. So let's set the width and depth to 25 segments, like so. Select this MoSpline, hold down Alt, and let's add in a cloner object. And with the cloner, choose Mode, Object, and let's grab this landscape and drop it in. Okay, so it's set to clone on all the vertices. I'm just going to set this to surface, and let's increase the count. So we're cloning these splines across a surface. Nothing too amazing going on so far. If we select this first MoSpline, switch to the Simple tab, let's set the number of steps to be a little bit lower. We probably don't need 100 steps. That's going to create a lot of vertices. Let's set that to, say, 5. On this first MoSpline, I'm going to set the length to be 1. So they're really small. You can hardly see them. Next, I'm going to grab the MoSpline and hold down Control and create a duplicate. And let's set the length of this to be, say, 100. In fact, let's set it a bit longer, 200, like so. So the cloner is currently set to iterate. And if we look at the surface here, we have these very small dots, which our MoSpline set to 1. And then we have the longer MoSpline, which obviously you can see. Let's select this second MoSpline. Let's just make it a bit more interesting. Let's give it some curve and maybe a bit of bend or something. Like that, just so we've got a bit more of an organic looking shape. Maybe not quite as much as that. Okay. If we select our cloner and set this to blend, it's now going to blend between this first spline, which is small and dead straight, and this second spline, which is much longer and curvy. And you can see that that's exactly what's happening. In fact, if we hid our landscape and set the cloner to be linear, like so, and let's just, you can see that that's the blend taking place. So it's blending from here to here. It's a fairly standard feature of cloner, but we're going to be doing this across our object. Let's just enable that object again. So what I want to do is show you how we could use this to kind of grow this and have some wind blowing it, which would be fairly useful. With our cloner object selected, choose MoGraph Effector and add in a plane effector. I'm going to uncheck position because I don't want it to transform them at all. The parameter I'm interested in is modify clone. And what I want to do is use this, and we can use this to control the blend. So if we just set our modify clone up to 100, you can see that now what happens is that all of our clones take on the second MoSpline. So they're basically all the full length. Now I want these to all be the shortest length. So what I need to do is on my plane effector, now I've set it to modify clone, I just need to adjust my minimum and maximum settings, and you can see that minimum is 0 but maximum is 100. If we set our maximum to 0, now they all take on the characteristics or the parameters of our first spline. Let's call this MoSpline short, and let's call this MoSpline long, so you know which is which. And we can call this plane start. I'm just going to choose save. Next, select the cloner again, and this time add in a plane effector. Let's call this plane wipe. I'm going to uncheck position. I'm only interested in using modify clone again, and I'm going to set modify clone to be 100. So we're back where we were before. But now if we choose to include some fall off on here, like so, and you can see if I grab this, I'm now going to grow these splines. So let's grab this plane wipe effector. Let's set the fall off to be 100. Come to my top view. Let's just position this on the edge like so. So we're on -400. And I'm just going to add a key, and I'm going to go to, say, frame 60 and set this to 400 and add another key. And you can see now that as we press play, all of our splines are growing on. If we also come to our Mo splines, let's just select both of those and switch to the Fields tab, and it's set to Mode Exclude. So what that means is it's any forces that we add are going to affect our Mo splines. Now if you only wanted one specific force to affect it, you would need to change this to Include and drag those forces into here. So what I want to do is come to the Simulate menu, choose Particles, and let's just add some wind. Now if we press play, we'll see that the wind will affect our Mo spline. That's not very obvious at the moment because there's no turbulence. The wind is just always the same speed. But if we maybe increase the turbulence, and now you can see how that's affecting. Let's just reduce the scale of that turbulence down. Maybe not quite that much. And you can see how that's having an effect. We can adjust the frequency of it so it happens maybe more often. Maybe just reduce the strength of the wind down a little bit. And there you go, and you can see we've actually kind of grown splines across the surface, and we have them all being affected by wind. So the Mo spline is, you know, a really powerful spline generation tool. And this is just touching the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully it kind of inspires you guys to experiment with this and look at how you can take it into some more creative purposes. So I'll include this with the download so you can have a look at how I set that up, because I know I'm going fairly fast, but there are, you know, a few more examples of things that I want to do. So let's just save this and let's have a look at another example. The final example, or the couple of examples that I'm going to show you now, are based on Mo spline once again, but this time we're going to look at the mode turtle. We had a look at simple, how we can use it to generate splines using just Mo spline itself. We've had a look at a few examples of using another spline as an input, and now we're going to look at the turtle option. So when we switch to turtle, you can see that we get this turtle tab, and in here we have these formulas, and we also have a values tab, and this has growth and all sorts of parameters in here. Now the turtle mode itself is basically using what's known as L systems, and L systems are a way that we can generate plant-like structures using these sort of formulas. So it's a little bit mathematical and can be quite confusing, but there are a lot of examples out there online that you can take. Houdini, for example, has a really powerful L system, so if you search for Houdini and L systems, you can come up with lots of formulas that are pretty applicable in our turtle mode when working with Mo spline. Now the default turtle with Mo spline is like this tree structure, but the power of L systems really comes in the fact that it's recursive, and you can come to the values tab and you can animate the growth, and you can see that it's essentially repeating this pattern of these 4 splines, and then as we grow it repeats that again, and then if we grow again you can see that it repeats it again, etc. And now we're starting to get more of a tree-like structure, and we can adjust the default angle that it's creating these new paths. We can adjust the default movement, which is essentially the distance it travels as we adjust the growth. And we can also add in things like randomness, so we can create a few of these, we can clone them across surface, we can blend between them, we can grow them as we did before. You know, we've got so much control, so you could quickly, for instance, create a forest of trees. But L systems have a huge amount of possibilities other than just growing things that look like trees, and I want to show you a few examples of these and then give you like a practical example of how you might use that. Now if you are interested in working with the L system in Cinema 4D, and specifically for creating kind of plants, things like that, there's actually a website that you can visit with loads of papers and stuff that you can use for research. So I've got that open here in Chrome. And the site is algorithmicbotany.org. And if you come here and you can look at this, the algorithmic beauty of plants. And if you click on here, you can see that we can actually download this as a PDF. And it's got all sorts of interesting stuff that you can use when you're researching this. And I actually have like some of the chapters here. So you can see it uses graphical modeling using L systems, and it goes through the principle. And here's an interesting example, so that we have like this initiator and this generator and the result that happens. And you can see that we start off with a really simple shape, but as we iterate through the repetitions of this, it becomes almost like a fractal, and it becomes extremely detailed. And this is the kind of principle behind it. So the way that it works is you have different languages that you use, different letters that tell the L system to do different things. And you can see here we've got F, 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 for example. And F is moved forward by a step of a defined length. And that defined length is the amount that we set in the default movement. And you can also have the default angle, default scale, etc. And if we come back to the Turtle tab and right click on rules and just choose show help, the help itself has a list of all of the rules, and it shows you some examples of how you can use this. There's a lot of stuff on using L systems, but this is handy to have, which are all the rules that you can use. And you can see that if we use it with a cloner object, we can actually clone at different points on our Mohs spline. So you can create some interesting kind of graphical displays. An example might be something like a football tournament, where you want to have the teams at these different branches, at these different intersections. And there are all these different examples in here that you can use. And of course you've got the book that I mentioned, and that has lots of examples as well. And also if you Google, as I say, things like Houdini. In this example you can see that we've used Mohs spline to create a cube. If I just cut this from the premise, you can have a look and see what happens. So it's A equals F plus F. So we go forward, and then we start a new branch, and then we put A, and then we close the branch. And if we just animate the growth here, you can see that we end up with this shape. And the reason it's this shape is because we have our angle at 90 and the movement is 200, which defines the length. If we come back here and then we repeat this 4 times, we end up with our cube. And we can grow this, of course. So if we animate the growth, you get some quite interesting results. Now you can take this even further. In this example, you can see the result looks very similar with a growth of 2, but if we look at the actual rules, you can see it's quite a bit more complicated. And this will create a network of cubes. So if I just pull out, and then let's animate growth, and you can see that we then create another cube and more cubes. And we end up with this really amazingly complicated network of cubes. I've also got a cloner in here, and the cloner is set to clone onto the Mohs spline. And because we're cloning onto the Mohs spline, we get this options for group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4 within our distribution. So if I enable this, you can see that now what we've done is we've scattered all of these cubes at certain points within our network. So we're starting to create some really intricate looking objects, you know, and this could be great for a lot of graphical uses. And it looks really nice that we can actually animate the growth of these kind of things. Here's another example where we're just creating random straight lines, and you can see that the rules are a whole bunch of random functions or formulas with different lengths. You can tell from the F repeated because this is our movement. And if we animate the growth of this, you can see each line grows and they're all different lengths, and we can keep animating this to extend this further along. So we're just basically creating random straight lines. Now I can't take the credit for all these examples. These are just like L system examples that I've gathered from the web and experiments that I've done, or other files that I've downloaded. As I said, we're going to look at a more practical example and how you might use this in a real project. So let's close these down and start with a fresh scene. I've added a Mode spline and it's currently at the default settings. I'm going to choose Mode Turtle. Let's delete the rules that are in here and delete the premise that's in here. And now you can see that we don't have any result in the viewport. Let's create a new rule. So call this A. And A equals, and here we're going to put F, or I'm going to use minus F. So it's going to take the movement value. Let's set that to be 20. And the next character is a vertical bar, which is shift / above the return key. And that forces the turtle to rotate. And then I'm going to put A again. So it's going to use itself in the rule. For the premise, let's choose F and then the rotation, vertical bar, and then A. And now if we come to values, I'm not sure you can really see what's happening there. Let's just come in. You can see that as we increase this, it's kind of unfolding. So creating a sort of star shape. Now if we set our default angle to actually be 180 instead, now as we animate the growth, you can see that we're kind of unfolding the spline. Let's set the object display mode to just be line, and let's switch to the basic tab and switch that to the use color to on, so you can actually see this a little bit more clearly. Come back to the values tab and let's animate growth, and there you go, and you can see that that's actually growing each section and rotating it. Now you may not want to grow all of these parameters. Maybe you don't want to grow the rotation, maybe you don't want to grow the movement. In this example, I'm going to uncheck grow movement so that it will actually just unfold each new section. So the only part that's growing here is the angle. If we then hold down Alt and drop this into an extrude NURBS, and let's set the Y to be 20 and the Z movement to be 0. I'm going to just set this to be quick shading with lines so you can see the polygons that are being created. Now as we animate the growth, you can see that we're getting quite an interesting result. We're actually unfolding a row of polygons, or we're creating an extrude, but each one of these is a separate segment. Select the extrude NURBS. Let's hold down Alt and drop this into a cloner. So now we have this being repeated. And of course we've got the extrusion set to 20, so we should set the Y movement to 20, so they butt up like so. And let's create a few more of these. And now if we animate the growth, you can see what happens. Now we are getting some funny shading going on here, but we can just set the thong angle limit to be much lower, and then we won't have that issue. Let's rewind to the beginning and set the growth parameter on our Mode spline to be 1, and add a key, and let's just jump to the, say, frame. Let's just jump to the end, and let's set that up to be 10, for instance, and add a key. I'm just going to select this track, press Alt L to make that linear. And now you can see we've got a whole bank of these clones unfolding. So that's pretty interesting. But if we select the cloner and choose MoGraph effector and add in a random effector, and rather than randomize position, come down to the very bottom of the parameter tab, and we have this time offset. And because we've got keyframes on our Mode spline, we can offset the animation of those. So let's set that to say 25. And now when we press play, you can see that they all start unfolding and the animation is randomized because of our effector. If we switch that off, it all happens at the same time. So that's looking pretty nice. We could also add in deformers if we wanted this to be a different shape. Let's just select the cloner, hold down Alt and drop that into a null, and let's take our cloner and I'm going to rotate it so that it's flat, and let's just rotate that round 180 degrees like so. So now we have our clones all animating along the ground, as it were. If we select the null and let's just drop in a bend deformer, and this bend deformer I'm going to set to have a strength of 360. Okay, we need to just rotate this around so it's on the right axis. So let's press R for rotation. Let's just grab this and rotate it around like so. Let's come out a little bit further. Switch to the Object tab and let's just adjust the size, not of our Z. We want to adjust the X size and make this smaller. Let's take this all the way down to 0. And if we grab this, we can move it along, and you can see how it affects our polygons. Let's come to the end, so we've got a whole bunch of them. Okay, and if we just position this correctly, you can create some crazy looking stuff. But now as we animate, you can see we're getting some really funky results. Let's just grab this bend deformer, rotate that 90. There we go, that's the result I'm after. So now I can wrap this around. Like so. We need to increase the Y size of our bend and just reposition this. Okay, so it's too big. There we go, something like so, and just keep going round to around here. So we kind of got a seamless disc, and as we animate, you can see the disc actually unfolds. So it's a pretty funky technique that you can use for creating geometric shapes and unwrapping them. You can use this for creating all sorts of shapes and having them kind of resolve onto screen. If we let's get rid of this bend deformer, let's select our cloner and change this to be radial. Let's drag that out of that null for now and switch off our random effector. If we just zero that cloner out, set the plane to be XZ. If we drop the extrude into a null by holding down Alt, we can then actually rotate this. And if we set the pitch to be 90, like so, let's just have a look. So now we're kind of building a tower. Come back to our cloner. If we come to the Transform tab, we can actually rotate these. So let's rotate them 90. Come back to the Object tab and let's increase the count. Set that to say 12. And let's decrease the radius. Okay, we need to just adjust that heading. There we go. So I just need to do the math really on the number of pieces and the rotation value that's required. I haven't got that quite right. You can see there are a few tiny gaps, but we're still, the principle is still the same. We're kind of building, you know, a cylinder, add in our random, and now we are kind of drawing a cylinder. And there's no reason that we can't put this into a null and then hold down shift and add in something like spline wrap. And if we add in another spline, let's just come to the side view, and we could use most spline for this. I'm just going to draw a spline like so. Let's just drop that in. And now, by adjusting the axes, you can see that we're now animating up here. Now we do need to come into the spline and just choose fixed bounding box, so as it changes size, we don't get that wobbling. And you can see now we're actually building a cylinder along a curve. So there are a lot of possibilities here. Now I haven't quite got the angle and the size right, because as I said, there are a couple of gaps in there. Perhaps just adjusting the size. If we hold down Alt like so. Now if you want a smooth result, of course this is made up of lots of pieces, so when we render we're going to have this faceted look. Now if you want to create a smoother result, you can do that, and the way that you can do it is by taking this group of objects that you have. Let's drop our random effector in there as well, and if we add in connect objects and drop this null as the object, you can see that now it's smoothed it out. Now we may need to just increase the tolerance, not that much, maybe to 2 or something. By increasing that tolerance, we've effectively welded those points together, even if there were gaps and things between them. And if we render now, you can see it renders as one piece. Now we've still got some edges showing up as hard here. That's probably because our extrude NURBS has got a really low thong angle. We could set this up to say 35, and we'll probably see that the result is a lot better. The other option, of course, if I just undo, is we can actually select the connect itself, set the thong mode to be manual, and then if we add in a thong tag, set the angle limit on here. Now if we render, now it looks nice and smooth, and we can even take this connect and we can drop this into HyperNURBS subdivision surfaces, so that we get this kind of funky thing at the end. And now if we rewind and have a look and press play, you can see we've got this cylinder kind of unwrapping. So that brings us to the end of this week's class. We started off with a very basic spline, most spline I should say, and we worked on the simple mode first of all and had a look at the parameters, how we can use offset, change the start and the end point, how we can curve it to make circles, helix, all these kind of things. We had a look at using it with another spline as an input, so we set the most spline to spline mode, and how we can use it like this with things such as align to spline. We then created a couple of most splines and used them in a cloner with some effectors, and we added in some wind to kind of wipe on like hairs or something like that. It could be anything, could be trees, it could be some graphical elements. And then finally we moved on and we had a look at the most spline turtle mode, where we can use it to create L systems. And in this example, we've unfolded a bunch of polygons, and then using the cloner and some deformers, we've made a few different shapes and looked at how we can make those shapes unwrap themselves and appear. So as you can see, most spline is a pretty fully featured object. It doesn't get as much credit as possibly it's due, and you don't see it used so much. So it's a handy little tool to use. If you work with splines, then perhaps using most spline will give you some extra functionality, or it might make things look a little bit more natural depending on what you're doing. Even the fact that you can just simply use that spline with something like wind could make some of your designs come to a whole new level. So I hope you enjoyed the class, and if you've got any questions, then please post them on the forums. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.